This
Hey
meeting is being
guys,
recorded.
welcome back to the channel. I'm Ken Michaels here for Ken Michaels Radio, where we talk exclusively about the Beatles. Could be anything about the group years, the solo years, what's going on in the news today. And this is actually a first on this channel because all the guests that I have here, all three guests are from across the pond. We've got two of them from the UK. We have Beatley Tone, who has his own YouTube channel, which is entirely on the Beatles. He puts out new shows constantly every single week, very entertaining on any subject surrounding the Beatles, very news oriented too. And we have DINO VESCERA, who has his own Facebook channel on Paul McCartney called Coming Up, the World of Paul McCartney. Welcome. I'll get to my third guest in just a second. Welcome, Tone,
Thank
and
you.
welcome, Dino. First time on the channel.
Thank you. Good evening.
Okay.
Good to be here.
Both Tone and Dino are both from the UK. Tone is from Essex, and Dino, you said you're from
Buckinghamshire.
Buckinghamshire. Okay.
Buckinghamshire. Yeah.
And we bring back a guest that we've had several times here on this channel. He was just on a couple shows ago, Eoghan Lyng from Ireland. He is the author. He's the author of George Harrison in the 70s, a book that came out fairly recently. He writes for Far Out magazine, Record Collector. In fact, Dino and Eoghan both have articles in a brand new issue that's devoted entirely to Paul McCartney. And also Culture Sonar and Eighth Day magazine. Welcome back, Eoghan.
It was great to be here. It was nice and jolly. Thanks very much.
You don't sound Irish. You sound more Liverpudlian.
Well, that's a Kerry accent, what I just did. This is as Irish as I get.
Okay, sorry. Sounded close to Liverpudlian to my ears. Anyway, the reason why we invited these three gentlemen on the show, actually it has to do with an article that Eoghan wrote not that long ago for Far Out magazine, in which he stated that he felt that Tug of War was Paul McCartney's best solo album. Now, the great thing about Beatle fans is that we all have different opinions here. And a fellow colleague of mine, Tom Frangione, who you can hear on SiriusXM's Beatle channel, told me several years ago, he not only thinks Tug of War is Paul McCartney's best album, he thinks it's the best of all the solo albums. It's a pretty tall order right there. But we all have different opinions, and to me, that's what makes it all interesting. We all have points of view that we love to share. So we're all going to be talking about Tug of War and in general Paul's solo catalog, which I just did with Eoghan. It was an overview of Paul's entire solo career from 1970 up to the present. But why don't we start with Eoghan and explain why you feel Tug of War is the best of all of Paul's albums. And when we say solo career, we're including everything. We're including Wings, we're including The Fireman, even his classical music, if you're inclined to love Paul's classical music too. But why do you feel that way about Tug of War?
Okay, thank you for asking. But just to make it clear, it's actually not that new a piece. I wrote in 2022, but 2 years on, I still stand by it.
Right.
It was written for the 40th anniversary of Tug of War, so that would have been April 2022. I just think it's the culmination of his life's work. Certainly up to that point, he was turning 40, so it's it makes references to the work he did in his 20s. It tips his hat at Wings. It ends with one of the greatest rockers of his life, and then has the trailer for what is going to be the 80s, which is Ebony and Ivory. So what I say is you have two choices. You can either get a greatest hits like Wingspan or All the Best, or you could just get Tug of War, which is effectively a best of anyway, but it's a studio album.
What song were you referring to when you said his best rocker?
Dress Me Up Like a Robber. It's just the guitars on that are just sensational. Okay, it's a funk rocker.
Okay. I love all the Spanish guitar work that's in that song.
Oh, it's like a chic track. I think I even said it in the Far Out piece. It's got a lot of Nile Rodgers-esque guitars on it. It's just funky, and it's impossible not to dance to.
Okay. There's a line here in your article that I thought I'd read. You said that Tug of War embodies the contradiction and contrast that his critics thought he was no longer capable of. You want to
Mm.
explain that?
Well, I mean, because throughout the 70s, there was a lot of, including Philip Norman, a lot of critics felt that he had become quite lightweight, he'd become a family man. But in two of the tracks, we've got Tug of War, and here today, he's taking on very, very lofty topics, which is about, life and death, pathos. We're talking about joy. We're talking about misery. I genuinely think the Tug of War track is up there. It's like the lyrics on that track are just something else. It is poetry. It's all about, uphill struggles, but the glories of uphill struggles. And although I don't think he's ever admitted it, it's clearly about, the contest he had between John Lennon about writing songs.
Well, I bet a lot of people feel the same way as you do, but
Mm.
Paul has never admitted that the song was about John.
That's a shame.
It's
Because
yeah, it's easy to think that. I mean, the songs we were singing, it's definitely about John.
Probably,
But
yeah.
unless the artist actually admits it, you really can't go by that. But it's easy to interpret it that way.
Yeah. And of course, it's got Wanderlust, which might be the best ballad of his solo career. Some days I think it's better than Maybe I'm Amazed. It really is just startlingly beautiful. And although it was rumored that George Harrison was to contribute to it, I really don't think he could have contributed anything to it. I think it is just perfect the way it is.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so in a way, would you say that Tug of War, you think this highly of the album because Paul is really being more serious in the
Yes, I think
lyrics,
so. Well,
looking at the
yes.
world view through his
Hmm.
eyes,
Yeah.
addressing the death of John Lennon in there,
Hmm. Yeah.
uh, Ebony and Ivory, songs like that.
Yeah.
Uh,
And there's a lot of political flair to it. And somebody who cares, I mean, he's talking about his loneliness, like how lonely he must have felt in 1982 when the best friend he ever had was murdered on the streets of New York.
so you're relating that to John's death.
I don't think he could have written without a sense of it was either the death or the fact that Wings had broken up, but there was a lot of change in his life.
Okay. Well, the decision for Wings to break up came from him.
It was, but I mean, but I think he recognized that it was game over for Wings. I think he recognized that there was a new decade and that he wanted to spend more time with his family and in the studio. And I don't think he wanted the Back to the Egg lineup the way he had with Jimmy McCulloch and Joe English.
All right. Tone, how do you feel about this subject? Do you think the Tug of War is the best album of Paul's post-Beatles career?
I don't, but I think it's an excellent album and a real sort of I don't like using the term return to form, but it is one of his strongest albums for quite a few years. I think he had a little lull at the end of the 70s and beginning of 1980, but I think he came back strong with this album. There's hardly a bad track on it, but I think it's a very strong album. It's not my overall favorite though.
What is your favorite?
But it would definitely be maybe top 6 or 7, maybe.
Okay. That's still saying something considering how many albums he's made.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's one of the best. It's one of the best.
So would you say, because you just said that there was a lull in Paul's career, that say London Town, Back to the Egg, and McCartney 2 represent a lull to you?
Yeah, compared with Tug of War, they do. Yeah, London Town is an album that I like a lot. I love the looseness of that album. I think back to the Egg. I think he was trying to do something different. He was trying to be contemporary and get and turn back to rock after doing what was a bit of a mishmash of an out. London Town's got great songs on it, but they don't really have a genre. There's some folky stuff on there. There's some rock stuff on there. There's some ballads on there, and I think Back to the Egg, he kind of tried to to get back to rocking, Obviously, it was it was a record that he wanted to take on tour, so he wanted a lot of upfront, fast songs on it. McCartney 2 is one of my least favorite Paul albums. Obviously experimental, but there's probably 3 or 4 really good songs on that, if we're absolutely honest. Whereas Tug of War, pretty much every song is good. Is good with varying degrees of goodness. I have to say, there's some absolute top tracks on it, and there's a couple of stinkers, I think.
Which ones would you call? Which ones would you consider?
My least favorite songs on Tug of War, Ebony and Ivory, and Get It. I think that side 1 is just so strong, and I think on side 2 it tails off a little bit, with a few wonderful moments. Dress Me Up as a Robber being one of them, and Wanderlust being another. I'm also a really big fan of The Pound Is Sinking. I love that song. But I think Ballroom Dance. I've listened to the album twice today in preparation of for doing this show, and I always felt that Ballroom Dancing was a kind. They first tried it, I think, as part of the Back to the Egg sessions, I think, and it was sort of put to one side. It's actually better. When I listened to it today, I thought it was better than I remembered, especially the sort of the hard guitar parts, which I thought I thought I was listening to it and I was thinking, well, that is definitely Eric Stewart playing that guitar part because it's so 10cc. And then I kind of looked at who plays what on the track, and he doesn't actually play guitar on it. So it's probably Chris Spedding that plays that sort of hard rock, interlude in the middle, which I really like on Tug of War, and like less on Broad Street because it feels weaker. It feels weaker on that album.
Okay. Well, I've never ever gotten tired of Ebony and Ivory. I mean, the lyrics are very simple, but they're very effective, getting his message across. And in many ways, Paul and Stevie Wonder sound so great together. My only regret is that they haven't done more work together, really, outside of the 2 tracks on here and the one song on Kisses on the Bottom, where Stevie plays harmonica. But I noticed Owen making a few faces when you were talking about McCartney 2, because I know he's a big fan of McCartney 2. He likes the inventiveness.
Lots of people are.
Yeah.
We all hear things differently. And with Ebony and Ivory, I can't get away from the couplet of rhyming keyboard with "Oh Lord" and getting away with it. It's like the worst rhyme ever.
Okay. I have no problem with it.
Okay.
Dino, how do you feel? Oh, by the way, I did ask you, Tone, what your favorite McCartney album is, so I didn't get an answer.
Oh, sorry. My favorite album is Venus and Mars.
Wow. Very interesting. When we were talking, Owen and I, the show we did a few shows back, I think you said you like Venus and Mars more than Band on the Run.
Yeah, I said it was the best of the Wings albums. It's the best of the Wings albums.
Okay. Dino, your turn. How do you feel about Tug of War, and do you think it's Paul's best album?
I don't think it's Paul's best album, but I'd put it in the top 5. Some albums of Paul's, there's some bits that can let it down a bit, and so it's not such a great album. I think Tug of War is such an eclectic selection of songs, which shows the greatness of Paul and his variety and his bravery. But I think the key thing is obviously it's tragic what happened to John. There's no doubt that influence and how Paul's feeling, his emotional state. So working with George Martin was a masterpiece. And it showed that when Paul best out of each other. They do something almost like brothers. They know each other's mind, like John did with Paul. And so there's such emotion to the album. It is an absolutely stunning album, beautifully produced. So much variation in song, and having Ringo on there and other great musicians, I think it showed the world that if people were kind of writing McCartney off a bit for
you're freezing up. Dino, wait, when you come back, you froze. So I want to try to make sure we get everything that you're saying here. We're having a problem with your audio signal.
It was back and fingers up to show them, look, this is an incredible in the masses. It's sold in the masses.
Yeah, it did go to number
it's
one.
Frozen, chaps.
Okay, well, that's one thing I wanted to bring up was George Martin here on the show, because he produced Tug of War and Pipes of Peace and Give My Regards to Broad Street. I think all three of those albums were wonderfully produced. Do you think that Paul really needs somebody there to tell him that he could do better?
Yes.
Because let's face it, now that everybody's praising Ram, he didn't have a producer for that album. Paul produced it. He didn't have a producer for Band on the Run. A lot of people look at Band on the Run as his best album. Most of the stuff of the 70s, he didn't have a producer. He did share production with Chris Thomas on Back to the Egg. So he has had a lot of success. And a lot of people love the DIY albums, McCartney, McCartney 2, McCartney 3, which he produced himself. So, Owen, why don't you tackle this question first?
Well, we mentioned it a bit on the episode I did with you last week, but I think when he's hot, he's untouchable. You mentioned in Band on the Run. I think Denny Lane was kind of the co-producer on that album, so I think if he thought a song wasn't really working, he would have told him. And maybe he doesn't need a producer, but he does need someone with keen ears to say this song isn't up to scratch and you can do better, and you're Paul McCartney, which Nigel Godrich did so wonderfully in Chaos and Creation in the Backyard, which I consider to be Paul's best work of the last 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's even better than Flaming Pie. I think because it's so thematically raw, and Nigel Godrich kept reminding him, "You're Sir Paul McCartney. We're not selling a cheap good. It has to be up to your level of standards. You're the man behind Revolver, and you're the man behind Sgt. Pepper, and you brought all this greatness to the world." And I think Paul could have produced that album himself, but he needed someone to say, "No, some of your recent work hasn't been up to that standard, and it needs to be at that standard."
Okay. Well, there are some people who might argue with this in the sense that, and I know we've got a lot of Pipes of Peace fans, but so many fans tend to look at Pipes of Peace as a letdown after Tug of War because the material wasn't as strong. And George Martin was the producer there, and he didn't seem to interfere in the choice of material. So how would you respond to that?
Well, Pipes of Peace is a more contemporary sounding album, whereas if Tug of War is if Tug of War is a full stop, it's Paul McCartney wrapping up the 60s and the 70s. Pipes of Peace is him embracing the 80s, and it like Press to Play is a very 80s sounding record. I mean, Keep Undercover, it could Keep Undercover could be on a Hall & Oates album. It's so 1980s. But I think it's a much more contemporary, much more hip, and maybe there's a sense of ageism. Why is this 41-year-old trying to sound young and hip, whereas these days 41 is like the new 30 in that sense. I rediscovered the Pipes of Peace album and just felt like, yeah, it's a really good 80s album. If you didn't have Paul McCartney's name on it, and if it didn't follow Tug of War, you'd say this is a very good album.
Thank you for saying that. You know how much I support Press to Play here, and yeah, but Tone, let's get your take on this. Does Paul need someone like George Martin to tell him you could do better?
Whether he needs someone or whether he's better when he's got someone, I think might be two different things. I think that he obviously works very well with George Martin, you know, because of their history. I'm not 100% convinced that George Martin is the sort, or was the sort of guy that would say to Paul, you can do much better, in the same way that Nigel Godrich did on the Chaos sessions, as Owen said. I'm not sure if he would. It's really difficult. It's a really difficult one to nail, because obviously George Martin is a top producer, and Paul's got no problems going to George Martin and say, can you score this, you know, this song, or this middle eight in this song, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's really difficult to know whether, you know, how much of it is down to the production and how much of it is down to the fact that, you know, in 1980 and 1981, Paul wrote a fantastic batch of songs, and George Martin just happened to be the producer of that album. Whereas, you know, maybe later on or earlier, you know, he didn't have a fantastic batch of songs in his locker. You know, he's come to the studio with, you know, 10 or 12, you know, really strong songs. And is that what makes it such a great album, or is it the production that makes it such a great album, or is it a combination of both of those things?
And that's a great point right there. I mean, I say it time and time again on this channel. To me, I'm very much a song man, and the song is the most important part of the recording. Everything is built around the song. So you might have the greatest production in the world for a certain song that isn't very good, and it's still not a good song. So it's a good point that you make there, Tone, because, you know, if Paul McCartney had the same songs that were on Tug of War, but he produced it himself, it didn't sound exactly the way that it has with George Martin producing it, would we be enjoying it the same way? There's a lot of people nowadays that prefer Paul's music, a lot of the solo Beatle music, without having other producers work. Like, some people would prefer George Harrison without Jeff Lynne producing them, for example, that kind of thing. Or Phil Spector producing George Harrison. It's so, because let's face it, the Beatles are all really good producers for themselves, as far as I'm concerned. Even Ringo's become a good producer. So, yeah. But
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Then I was just going to say, but you could even go back to from the point of, I'm not sure whether George Martin would be the sort of guy that would say, no, you can do much better than this. You can go right back to the sort of the Please Please Me sessions, you know, where, you know, he wanted them to do How Do You Do It, and they said, no, we're not doing it. So even when they had absolutely nothing under their belt, you know, where they weren't, you know, George Martin was much more important than they were at that particular point,
right.
Or had a much better career, should we say? You know, they still had the bottle to say, no, that's not what we do. We write our own songs, and we want to do our own song, and that song isn't for us. Right when they, you know, right at the beginning, when they, you know, they were no one really.
Yeah.
So I think that by the time you get to the 80s, I think Paul is probably, you know, Paul's career is sort of, you know, up there by then. I think he's probably calling the shots as far as what gets recorded, but obviously he is using George Martin to help what he's hearing in his head happen musically, I think.
Right. And for my money, and I love all the producers that Paul's worked with, nobody can arrange a Paul McCartney song with strings or brass. You know, George Martin had a natural gift to know exactly what works on a McCartney song, at least in my opinion. Okay, Dino, let's hope that your audio is a little better this time. How do you feel about this subject about, does he need somebody like a George Martin to tell him whether or not his songs could be better, that he can improve upon them? We've heard what Owen and Tone have to say about this. How do you feel about that?
I can kind of judge that. Right. Okay. What I was going to say was, sorry, it froze again. Then that I think all those years where Paul worked by himself, not by himself, but producing himself.
Yeah.
I'm not saying maybe he was coming burnt out, but maybe he wanted somebody, some help. He wanted. There's only so much I think a mind can probably do. And when we're speaking of a mind, obviously he's beyond a genius with music and arranging. I'm talking Paul and songwriting. And so I think possibly if he was an emotional state, which I do say a lot for Tug of War, he needed some help. And George was a perfect friend that had been there from the beginning and could give an emotional help, production help. Plus, and I've said this before many times, that I think Geoff Emerick on the sound, on the sonics, when he's involved with Paul, Geoff Emerick brings something extra to the sound, whether it be the way he mics it, but he does something. Look at the sonics and everything on Band on the Run, how whether it's electric guitar, acoustic guitar. Saying Paul can't do that. Of course he can. He had a string of hit albums. But I do think that Paul, Geoff Emerick and George Martin are the three that make it a masterclass in songwriting, production, sound.
That's a good point right there. And Paul continued to work with Geoff Emerick later on with George Martin. Seems like whenever George Martin was there, Geoff Emerick was with him. So they're definitely a great team, no matter what. Yeah. Did you wish that Paul had continued to work with George Martin for full albums as opposed to individual songs like Beautiful Night he worked on, Calico Skies? Would you have liked to have seen George Martin return every now and then for a full album with Paul? Dino?
Absolutely. If I look at some of my favourite stuff, I think I said before, I think George brings out the best in Paul, and Paul possibly pushes and brings the best out in George Martin. However, I think you've got to look at the most fans' opinion, and probably mine. Tug of War is better than Pipes of Peace. And then you're on to Broad Street, which to me is a greatest hits of Paul's career, reimagined, if that's the word to be used. And then after that, look what happened. Press to Play. And even though I love Press to Play, it hasn't got the same sense and majestic feel of Tug of War. So when George Martin was off, Paul waned a bit with his sound, and possibly the songwriting wasn't so good as well until Flowers in the Dirt. And I think the production was a big thing on Flowers in the Dirt as well. But yeah, I think I love everything George Martin's probably done with Paul.
Okay. Well, that's interesting what you're saying there about Press to Play, that it wasn't as majestic, or that was the word you used, I think, on Tug of War. But it could very well be that you're so used to the classic music that Paul recorded with the Beatles and George Martin, and even later on with Live and Let Die with George Martin. And then here comes Tug of War, and it's more of all the skills that George Martin has brought to the table. And I like the fact that, you brought up Geoff Emerick too. But then when you're moving along to Press to Play and you've got Hugh Padgham there and he's bringing you the sounds that were really hot at the time, I love the fact that Paul experimented and was willing to go in that direction and to do off the wall things like Pretty Little Head, and Talk More Talk. Not too far removed from McCartney too, as far as I'm concerned, but production-wise, yes, all the different sounds. But I think for that moment, and I still love the sound. 80s music does not sound dated to me. I listen to it all the time. It's so much a part of my everyday life that I don't feel like it's only from that era. And I think that Paul adapted very well to the 80s sound through Hugh Padgham and his work and what he brought to some of those songs. But maybe you prefer Flowers in the Dirt because it's more a return to an old style of Paul production-wise, despite the fact that you had so many different producers and engineers.
Yeah, I agree. I always, do you know what the silly thing is? This is the truth. When Press to Play come out, and I bought I rang MPL in London and I said, can I speak to Paul, please? I said, my name's Dino. He goes, what's it about? I said, I just want to tell him that Press to Play is the best album he's ever done. On that day, I did think it, because I knew it was a big change. But now I see Press to Play as an album of, to me, not brilliant songs and more of sounds. I do love Press to Play. Like, I love McCartney too. I love it when he's experimental. But I find Press to Play more an album of sounds and production rather than great songs.
Okay. I would definitely say Footprints and Only Love Remains and Tough on a Tightrope are three of his best songs, you know, and he's done so many great songs. And, well, you know, I know what you're saying. I can love a song like Press. Press definitely has that production element to it and lots of different sounds, but it's still a fun song, the way that it's all constructed. Stranglehold is kind of traditional Paul with some more 80s sound and more heavy drums. You know, it's it really is more of, with the exception of Talk More Talk and Pretty Little Head, it's compositionally, it's not too far removed from other McCartney albums. It's just the production is different and sounds more of what was coming out at that time. You know, when it comes to ballads, Footprints and Only Love Remains are top tier, and they could have been on Tug of War with George Martin production behind it, you know?
Yeah.
What do you look for most in a McCartney album? I mean, we all have different tastes, and for some of us are more melody guys or lyrics guys. How important is production to you? How important is going with a style and a sound that you were best known for, that you are more comfortable with? Or do you admire artists more when they do experiment and leave their comfort zone? It's a lot of questions there, all rolled into one. I hope you can all handle it. Tone, let's start with you. What do you look for most in a Paul McCartney album?
That's a really difficult. I suppose the answer to that is strong songs that are not always instantly accessible. It's really funny because, you know, I think that the songs on, say, something like Tug of War are mostly instantly accessible. I think Owen said it was a bit like a greatest hits, and it's hard to argue against that, because so many of these the songs on that album could have been singles. But for me, you know, some albums take a long time to drop before I really like them, and McCartney 3 was one of those. It took me about a year to really like it, and I do really like it now, and I think it's the best of the three. But sometimes that's how it works. Wildlife, the songs on Wildlife are not strong, but for me that album is all about the feel of that album, the texture of it. And again, it took me a long time, you know, to really appreciate it. And so different things from different for horses for courses, as we say here. You know, if the Beatles hadn't have done any of the song, or Wings for that matter, that hadn't have done any of the songs that were on Give My Regards to Broad Street, we'll probably be saying it's his best album. If those were all new songs, we'd probably be saying it's his best album. It's got Here, There and Everywhere on it, and For No One. If the Beatles hadn't have done that, and they were new songs, we'd probably be saying, you know, that's his best album. So it's really difficult for me to put my finger on. It's different things, but mostly it's for me it's about the songs, but not necessarily about the lyrics. You know, I want to hear him playing good bass guitar. You know, I want to hear him, you know, I want especially these days, I want his voice to be, you know, good. You know, we know that it's got weaknesses now, but you know, it can still be good. And sometimes depending on the nature of the song, it kind of suits his sort of old man voice, I think. You know, so it's a really difficult one to put my finger on. It's somewhere it's somewhere amongst all those things, I guess.
There's so many reasons to love Paul's music, and the voice
Yeah.
is a big part for me because I think he's one of the greatest vocalists ever and most flexible vocalists. He's got so many different voices, and that's along with, because I think you were talking about the eclecticism in Paul's music. I think Dino, you were bringing up the eclecticism. He's mastered so many different musical styles. He hasn't done every single one of them, but he's pretty darn close, you know. And when he sets his mind to it, you know, if he wants to do a classical piece, you know, and not just a classical song, but an oratorio, he does it. You know, and he wants to do a ballet, music for a ballet, he does that too. He's kind of, you know, he loves the challenge of doing all these different things. But yeah, there's so many reasons to admire him, you know, and certainly writing strong songs comes first before anything else. Owen, how about you? What do you look for most in a McCartney album? What would you want to hear the most from him?
I want to hear something I've never heard from him before, which is why I have an issue with Flaming Pie, because it's a recap of things that he's done before in the past, and often stuff he's done better in the past. There isn't anything new on that album. You look at, say, Tug of War, you've got Take It Away. I can't compare Take It Away to anything else he's done in the Beatles, in Wings. It's so out there, it's so new. It doesn't begin, it doesn't end. It's just such a weird piece of music, and I love him for that. You look at there's so many examples I can say on McCartney 2 that he's trying new sounds, that there's a great sense of adventurism. On McCartney 3, as Tone very kindly said, as he said, it's a very fine album. I mean, there's deep feeling. I can't compare that. That my mouth dropped the first time I heard that, because I was like, where did this song come from a man who's facing 80? How and I mean, I know the track he made with Rihanna was quite controversial in certain sectors, a song he co-wrote with Kanye West. But again, I thought it was something I haven't heard from Paul McCartney before, and I admired the adventurism of it. And I mean, I'd almost take a Grand Folly from McCartney over like another cohesive album like Stadium Rock, like a Kisses on the Bottom, which, you know, divides fans. I take my hat off. You know, we haven't had like an album 1920 standards from Paul McCartney until now, and he did very, very well. And his voice has gotten crispier and maltier. It sounds like a nice whiskey. And I think he just had the perfect voice for that style of music. And I mean, some songs like My Valentine, you can't be. It's so achingly romantic, and it feels like it could have been recorded in the 1920s, or it could have been recorded by a crooner like Frank Sinatra. And like I say, if I would take a Grand Folly with experimentalism. So say Press to Play with songs like Pretty Little Head, which is again another one where it's like, where did this come from?
Right.
It's incredible. Over like a very tight, cohesive album like Flaming Pie, which was tight and cohesive, but it hinged very heavily on, say, the tracks he was listening to from Beatles anthology.
See what I mean, guys? Different opinions here. That's what I love about, you know, inviting different people here who really know the music pretty well. And it's interesting that you said what you did, Owen, about Kisses on the Bottom, because with my colleagues at Talk More Talk, they all kind of feel like it would have been a great album if Paul had recorded it when he was younger and his voice was so much stronger and can handle those kind of songs. I do like the more softer delivery, kind of like what he did with I Will, if you think about it.
Yeah. Or Women and Wives. He's got that, you know, saltier, older voice. I don't think he could have done that Women and Wives as a younger man. I think it needed that heft, you know, the reflection in his voice, I mean, it's not as technically accomplished to say Maybe I'm Amazed, but that's not what the song is about. It's a very reflective, yearning song.
Right. But if you go to Kisses on the Bottom, like you mentioned, My Valentine, or Only Our Hearts, or Get Yourself Another Fool. I mean, the range of that song is so perfect for Paul to sing it in. His voice was just very natural in a song like that. I kind of was hoping most of the songs would be with that voice instead of the softer delivery. But still, I'm glad he did it.
Me too. Yeah. I didn't appreciate it in 2011 when I was going to university and I was 18 and I had army jackets on and it was such an uncool thing to do. But now that with like 10, 11 years reflection, I think it was the right thing for him to do at that moment in his career.
Yeah. I wish he'd do it again, but he doesn't like to repeat himself. So
No, no, and I admire him for that. He does one Bond track. He makes the monster of all Bond tracks. He doesn't repeat it again. He's not Shirley Bassey who'll return to Bond every 10 years or so.
I don't know Shirley Bassey's catalog that well enough beyond Goldfinger and maybe a few other songs, but anyway, Dino, how about you? Let's hope that your audio is better because you still kind of cut out. Then. But what do you look for most in a Paul McCartney album? What matters to you the most?
I want to be surprised. I want to hear something familiar, but lots of surprises, like almost out of his comfort zone, thinking he's never done that before. But I also want all the best bits of him in there. I want some brass. I want some electric guitar. These are on separate tracks. I want some rocking piano. I want raucous vocals. I want a ballad. I want Paul to do everything on an album, but surprise me. And I know this is be talking about Tug of War, and that the most emotional I got listening to any Paul McCartney album was Egypt Station. I just sat. I didn't think he had that in him to do an album like Egypt Station. I know it's not. We're not here to talk about that album, but I was just gobsmacked at the variety, and the diversity of the guy. We go on about it and on, but there's nobody that's been as diverse, and there never will be. That you don't know what's coming next, and you can't. There's a few songs you say it's typical McCartney, but there's so many tracks on so many albums, and this is what's sad. A lot of tracks that never get played on the radios. For example, Tug of War. You heard obviously Tug of War, Ebony and Ivory, which got overplayed to death, and Take It Away. But there's so much on there that never got played, and the same with a lot of McCartney albums. There's so many tracks on an album, untypically McCartney, which would not get played on the radio. That's what I like. Stuff like that.
You need to listen to my radio show, Dino. I have my radio show, Every Little Thing, and I mix familiar with deep cuts from the group and the solo careers. And I love doing that. Ballroom Dancing, to me, I've often said is the greatest single that never was.
Yeah.
That song should have instantly been the third single. I even think it would have been a stronger single than Take It Away. Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
And there was a video made for it. They had the video already done. Actually, no, they hadn't, because that was Broad Street. I'm wrong on that. Yeah. But they should have brought it out off Broad Street. That's what they should have done.
Not only that, but like a year or so later, the Kinks came out with Come Dancing, which was really kind of very similar in style and similar in theme, going back to your past when you were a youth, trying to get a girl to dance with you at the dance hall, that kind of thing. And they had a good shit with it. So I feel like Paul really missed the boat when it came to Ballroom Dancing. That should have been a single over a Tug of War, which is a great song, but I couldn't see that as a single, as a hit single. But yeah, it's interesting. I know you've told me privately that Egypt Station is your favorite McCartney album. Is it kind of similar to Tug of War in a way because it moves you emotionally for the things that he says in there that are kind of personal, like in I Don't Know?
I love it when Paul is not playing safe, and I'm not using that as a derogatory term. Going about him coming out of his comfort zone, when he sings and he means it with real emotion and heartfelt angst or love, not just going through the motions. I love Tug of War to death. What it does have for me, and this is the only thing that knocks it a bit for me, it's tinged with sadness. There's some tracks like I'm just looking on Here Today and Somebody Who Cares, and so they're very emotional songs and quite sad compared to Pipes of Peace, where it's all uplifting. And so, but with Egypt Station, again, it's just all over the place, here, there, and everywhere. I'm sounding corny now, but that's what I like. Up, down. It's like a roller coaster ride, McCartney songs. Up, down, the emotion levels it does to you, and you're hearing things on you in your ears. You think, I hadn't heard that before. And so that's why it pips Tug of War for me. Plus, it's a double. It's a double album.
A lot of his albums are really double albums once you add up all the bonus tracks and the B-sides and everything. So I want to run a question by the three of you, because very often it's been said that when Paul is faced with tragedy or adversity of any kind, that's when he does his best work. When Henry McCullough and Denny Seiwell left him before he and Linda and Denny Laine went to Lagos, he produced Band on the Run. In fact, in the McCartney Legacy book that Alan Kozin co-wrote with Adrian Sinclair, Paul had this attitude of, let's show him. So Denny Seiwell left and Henry McCullough left. So he ended up putting out what most people think up to that point certainly was Paul putting out what he was capable of, the best album up to that point. I know these days a lot of people go back to Ram, but I'm saying at that point in time, Band on the Run was a masterpiece, and some people still think of it as being his best album and a masterpiece. After John Lennon dies and Wings ends, he puts out Tug of War. Flaming Pie, he's in the middle of Linda dealing with cancer and dying. You know, for these reasons, that's why I raised this question. How do you guys feel about that? Because I know Paul has denied that. He said that's a horrible thing, that you have to go through tragedy to put out your best work. But do you think that was a factor in some of these albums that I spoke of, or maybe other albums in his solo career? Owen, let's start with you.
Well, I'm as you know, I'm not the biggest fan of Flaming Pie, so but I think there's something. But an album that was about recovering from grief is the album he recorded immediately afterwards, Run Devil Run, which was about returning to songs from the 1950s. And I mean, it features some of his, some of his liveliest, most impactful vocals. I wrote about the album a few years ago for Culture Sonar. I think that's an album that stemmed from grief. I don't think he would have hit the highs as he does on, say, Lonesome Town, where he actually sounds like he's about to burst into tears towards the end of Lonesome Town, because it reflects it's a reflection of his internal grief. And I mean, there's other times in
I'm sorry, Owen, what internal grief during London Town? When his father?
Run Devil Run.
Lonesome Town.
I'm sorry. Okay. I thought I heard you say London Town too. Okay.
No. I mean, you could also say that he faced adversity when during back to the Egg album, when he's trying to rebrand Wings as a hip post-punk act, but that didn't really take off, and I don't think it's a great album. I know you and I have disagreed on that, Ken. And sometimes, quite often, people misread stuff and say tragedy is tragedy. I mean, I always thought Nobody Loves You When You're Down and Out, the John Lennon number, was a reflection of his success going down the toilet and Yoko leaving him. And when I interviewed May Pang a couple of weeks ago, she said that it was a song he penned with Frank Sinatra in mind. I mean, quite often people read too much into this stuff. So I can understand why Paul McCartney would say, no, I think that's a coincidence. I would have produced my best work with that. I think he was ready in '73 to produce his best work with or without Henry and Denny. I think Denny Seiwell could have appeared on the album. I don't think Henry McCullough would have, because if you'd read McCartney Legacy, he'd already quit once beforehand. I bet Denny Seiwell could very easily have been on that album, playing drums on Picasso's Last Drink and adding to that sort of frisson.
Okay. Dino, how do you feel about this particular topic? Do you think it made a very big influence on music by having something traumatic happening around that time?
Yeah, I think tragedy affects us all obviously deeply, and when you're a singer-songwriter, a multi-instrumentalist, etc., like Paul, it has to come out in his work. Like you say, with Band on the Run, what was happening with Wings, with John being murdered, with Linda being very ill. But if that's the case, right, I know it upsets some people when I say my mind, but like you say, we all speak our minds, and we're all right personally about what we say because it's personal. I have problems with the first McCartney album. Now, to me, the first McCartney album, as in McCartney, I'm not saying it should be his greatest, and don't get me wrong, maybe I'm amazed it's possibly his greatest song he's ever written since the Beatles split up. But if that's the case, when he's going through angst and trauma and depression with McCartney, it doesn't work for me, McCartney. It doesn't. So that goes against all the other stuff when he's having bad tragedy and major trauma in his life. I don't find that with the first McCartney album.
You don't feel like the entire album of McCartney has this certain vibe? I think because it was so unique for an artist at the time to play all the musical instruments and everything, that kind of makes it even more personal when every single sound that you're hearing on the record is what's in Paul's head, which you could say, a lot of his music is that way too, with the musicians that he works with, because he has so many ideas. But some people look at the first McCartney album as being very personal, not just Maybe I'm Amazed, but Man Who Was Lonely, that kind of thing. But I understand very often I've said certain songs like that, that would be something. Okay. I love the vibe of it. I love the feel of it. I love the sound. I love Paul's voice. I love all the stuff he's doing on drums. It's a really oddball, funky track. But as a composition, there ain't too much to it. You know, it's like, why don't we do it in the road? It's the same kind of thing. There's a couple of lines of lyrics, but it's the pounding of the piano and Paul's voice that makes the recording special. That's what the McCartney album is like. So for someone like myself who always says the song is what's important the most, yeah, that's true, but there can be other reasons why you like certain recordings. I still love Why Don't We Do It in the Road, but I will acknowledge that it's not a great composition. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, it's kind of interesting. There are some people out there that think not just with Paul, but a lot of artists when they're facing something, tragic in their lives, it inspires them to write their best music. But then you could also be thinking, well, these just happen to be the songs that he was writing at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was writing songs for Band on the Run before Henry and Denny left.
Mm-hmm.
So they were the same songs that they recorded in Lagos and then went back to England and Abbey Road to work on them and add more to it. Those songs were already there. It just so happens those were the songs at the time that he was writing. So it's all how you look at it, I suppose. Tone, what's your
I think it's a bit hit and miss, and for that exact reason, because of the songs, the songs are not always written at the time of the adversity. I always think that this theory that does his best stuff in times of adversity applies more to John Lennon than it does Paul McCartney. I think John always did his best work when his back was against the wall, and as a thing, I was going to say exactly the same thing as Dino said about McCartney. When he was writing those songs, he was doing the recluse thing. He was drinking a lot. He was very depressed. But to me, that doesn't really come across in the album. Obviously, with Tug of War, the songs were written, post John being murdered. But again, as Dino said, there is a bit of sadness on the album, but there's also a lot of fun on the album. Take It Away, What's That You're Doing, Ballroom Dancing. There's a lot that again, it's very difficult. And then you could say, You know, I know he did Run Devil Run. You know, he just wanted to get back in the studio after, you know, after Linda had passed, and, you know, knock out some rock and roll songs. But the first album that he wrote after, you know, she passed, Driving Rain, was not well, you know, was not well thought of. You know, and, you know, there's songs on there that, you know, that point at, you know, Linda's passing, things like Lonely Road and stuff like that. And Chaos and Creation, which we've said is probably his best work, you know, of 25 years. I don't think the Heather Mills thing was quite happening. That, you know, the breakup hadn't really started yet when he was right. You know, the album came out in 2005, so he probably wrote most of the songs in 2004 or maybe early 2005. So, you know, he was probably you know, quite happily married at that time, when he was writing the songs for Chaos. And also the thing about Adversity, you could probably also apply that to Ram in the way that you kind of want us to say, you know, he was so hurt by the critics' reaction to the McCartney album that he had a bit, right, well, let's show him. And he kind of, you know, he threw everything but the kitchen sink at Ram, you know, big production, and, you know, thought that he'd made a fantastic album, but they still didn't like it. It took another 20 or 30 years for people to realize that it's a fantastic album. But yeah.
Interesting. I've always thought that, I mean, you were talking about Run Devil Run, Owen, that McCartney, sometimes to get his creative juices flowing, he goes back and does 50s rock and roll. So much a part of him. Think about the Get Back, Let It Be sessions. You know, while they're writing new material, you know, they're playing a lot of oldies then. And then there's the Russian album, you know, in between Press to Play and Flowers in the Dirt. I think probably Paul wasn't at all happy with the poor reception that Press to Play got. So, you know, he was looking around, who am I going to work with? Phil Ramone, David Foster, people like that. And before Flowers in the Dirt, you know, just to get him back in action again, and you know, like I said, to get his creative juices flowing, let's do these 50s rock and roll songs. So I think that's why he does those things like Run Devil Run. He does that, and then he starts, you know, he's always writing original material too. But I think that's part of the reason why he does that. There's so much of a love that he has for the 50s rock.
Yeah.
One last thing I want to bring up, and I know I brought this up with Owen. Paul has had a habit of working with producers who are the hot producers of the time. I mean, even before he worked with George Martin on Tug of War, he did, no. Yeah, with Say, it was around the same time. There was a mix of that, and Jelly Bean Benitez did it, who at the time was working with Madonna on her music, working with Chris Thomas on Back to the Egg, and later on Run Devil Run. But Chris Thomas was a big producer at that time, very hot then. Hugh Padgham, Press to Play, the various people on Flowers in the Dirt. You know, you can run off a lot of different people. Flaming Pie, really, I don't, even though Jeff Lynne was involved somewhat with Flaming Pie, I don't look at it as Jeff Lynne really playing that big a part production-wise in Flaming Pie at all. You know, all the various people, David Kahn, Greg Kurstin, Mark Ronson, all these big names. Do you think that it's a wise move for Paul to always do that? Do you like when he works with the producers of the moment, because at least, well, maybe it'll give him a contemporary sound? Or should he pretty much stick with, you know, what's worked for him before and what made him popular to begin with in the Beatles and certainly in the 70s? I know, Owen, you said that you prefer when Paul surprises us. So you probably would like when he works with different producers, but At the same time, we all have different opinions on this subject. And I do sense, like I said before, that there are a lot of Beatle fans out there that kind of prefer when the solo Beatles just produced their own music and would move away from whoever who happened to be hot at the moment. There are people, even several years ago, talking about Cloud Nine. There were fans who wrote in to Talk More Talk, wishing that they'd like to hear Cloud Nine without Jeff Lynne's production. Just George Harrison's sound. So there are people who love Paul's production just by himself, would rather that he stick to working by himself, or do you prefer it when he tries out all these various producers? I do honestly think, because several years ago Paul was at the Grammy Awards and Adele was performing, and you could see Paul in the audience bopping his head, getting really into the music. So he enjoys a lot of this new music that's out there, and I'm sure that he likes the production from these artists. He liked what Hugh Padgham was doing at the time with the drum sound for Genesis and Phil Collins and the Police. So he does listen to that, and he really does like those sounds. Do you prefer when Paul works with these various producers, or do you think he's better off, producing himself? Let's start this time with Tone.
I think it depends on who the producer is. Really, I mean, Paul always wants to be contemporary. He's always looking to draw in a new audience, and with modern music, I'm not sure if that's a great move. He doesn't want to alienate the fans that have been with him for years, just for the sake of a hit single. The latest tracks that he's recorded with Andrew Watt, who obviously produced the Rolling Stones album Hackney Diamonds, and great job he did with that. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how those two work together. So I think that it does depend, but he does go with what is popular at the time. Honestly, I think that it does depend who the producer is. Going back to Nigel Godrich, he was producing Radiohead around that time that they worked on Chaos to get together, and Radiohead were probably one of the biggest bands in the world at that particular time, and it was a good that was a good move for him in so many different ways. Hugh Padgham probably didn't work as well for him, but he had fantastic success, like you say, with Genesis and Phil Collins solo albums. Chris Thomas, back to the Egg, he produced Queen, he produced the Sex Pistols, and it was who was in the frame at the time. And to me, it just depends on who the producer is, really, whether it's a good move or not.
Well, with Hugh Padgham, I do love the production on that album. And sometimes I wonder if we should question whether or not, if the reception wasn't as strong as Paul hoped it would be, is that necessarily the fault of the artist or the producer or fans that aren't willing to accept any kind of change in production or style?
I don't know, though, because Phil Collins was selling millions and millions of albums at that particular time. I love Press to Play, but I think that it's got it's got on side 2 it tails off a little bit after Pretty Little Head. It tails off a little bit for me. I think the first side is just fantastic. I love it. Yeah. And obviously then Press and then Pretty Little Head I love as well, and then sort of Move Over Busker and that sort of that angry and however absurd, it drops off a little bit for me, but yeah, I really like the album, but it wasn't well received yet. Hugh Padgham was producing albums that were selling millions and millions and millions for Phil Collins and Genesis. The Invisible Touch album was around that sort of time, Genesis album.
Right. Well, I do think that you did a great job with Paul. I mean, I really enjoyed the entire album. I can understand the tapering off bit in a way, as much as I love a song like Angry. I've often said you've got Phil Collins Phil Collins and Pete Townsend with Paul McCartney, you can produce something a little better than that. But I still love that song. Okay. But
for me, the fact that it's got those two on it, that's a bit like driving a Ferrari to the corner shop. If you you know what I mean, you got like a big cast.
Yeah,
but
I'm always doing
you're
that.
only going to the end of the road, sort of thing, in it.
same thing with Rockestra.
Yeah, maybe.
You got all those great musicians, and you're playing a fairly simple instrumental. You know, they could have done so much more with that lineup of so many great musicians. But I still love the Rockestra theme, and so glad to see you here. All right, Dino,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was thinking through this, and I actually don't like it when Paul's got a lot of producers on an album, because I don't think it always flows. Yeah, there might be a bit of diversity, but sometimes it just goes off at too much of an angle, and then you've got another song. I'm not saying it's not totally different, just the sound. It doesn't work for me sometimes. And going back to Hugh Padgham, I mean, one of my favourite albums ever is Synchronicity by the Police. The sounds on that, and they're great songs, is incredible. And I feel that when Paul got Hugh Padgham, I don't want to call Hugh Padgham Flavour of the Month, like you say, with Genesis, Phil Collins and the Police, incredible. But by the time Paul got to him, I think that kind of sound and everything had gone out. Paul had kind of missed the boat with that producer. Had been like a year or two behind. But who I would like Paul to work with, and it sounds a bit strange and it goes against what I just said, I don't like him working with different producers. Now, was it Rick Rubin, I think, that did the last Johnny Cash album, or the last few albums, and he rejuvenated Johnny Cash and brought something out of Johnny Cash, which when I heard it, I thought, wow, Johnny Cash is at that age and his albums and songs are incredible. So I'd like him to work with Rick Rubin. Also, I don't know if he produces, but Dave Grohl, I'd like to see them do some stuff. And believe it or not, Nile Rodgers. I know Nile Rodgers worked with Madonna, Duran Duran and Bowie. I'd like him to work with Nile Rodgers to get a funky thing in there or something. I would love that.
I'm definitely simpatico with you there, Dino. I have mentioned Nile Rodgers myself because you know, I happen to love the work that he did with David Bowie, for one thing, and he's a huge Beatle fan. And Rick Rubin is friends with Paul, as is Dave Grohl. So we'll see. You know, with Dave Grohl, you know you're going to get a lot of edge on a McCartney album there. So as witness with Cut Me Some Slack, and yeah, I would love to see them do more work together. But does he really need a producer? I mean, do you prefer him more when he produces himself, or do you like him more when he has another producer? Whether it's a current producer who is the hot producer at the moment, or would you rather that, like McCartney 3 was all Paul? You know, a lot of people love the sound of McCartney 3. It's back to his roots. Dino?
Sorry, you got me, yeah? Me.
Yeah, I'm continuing with you.
Yeah. McCartney 3 proves that I'm not knocking anyone else. Paul doesn't need musicians. It also proves, I know there's one track, is it Sliding, his band on. He doesn't need other musicians. He doesn't need other producers. But I do feel, I think he does work best with a producer because it comes at another angle. McCartney 3 is not safe. I mean, what's that track going to get deep down, deep when down. I heard that, I thought that's a load of rubbish. And then I think it's the best track on it. And when he opens up with Long-Tail Winter Bird, again, how brave is he to start with a track which is virtually all instrumental apart from a few words? And he produced that himself. So I'm really mixed whether he needs a producer or not. He doesn't, but sometimes they bring the best out of him. But he doesn't really need one. He doesn't really need anyone. The only problem I'll say with that is sometimes just say Paul's recorded bass, then guitars, then drums, and done vocals. Sometimes the sonics can lose on it compared to when all the band are playing live together. That's my thought on that.
Okay. And what's it like when you've got somebody like Paul who has more history than the producers that he's worked with? You know, he's had so much success. You would think that I always forget if it's Hugh Padgham or Nigel Godrich. Which one did he say, how many #1 records have you produced? Was that
I think
Hugh
it's Hugh
Padgham.
Padgham.
that was Hugh? Okay.
Yeah.
So I understand Paul's point of view there, but at the same time, you need input from other people occasionally. And it does help to have someone who is kind of sharp when it comes to what's working today. But then there are some fans who would think, why should you care about sounding contemporary? Just be who you are and be comfortable who you are and what made you the great songwriter and artist that you've been all these years. But then there are some fans that enjoy it when he reaches out for someone who happens to be doing very well at the moment and seems to know what sounds work. It's not an easy question to answer there because, like I said, we all have our own opinions. Owen, how do you feel about this?
Well, if it's all right, I'd like to read a bit of the piece I wrote for the issue Dino and I contributed to the Record Collector.
Sure.
So I can't remember what Dino wrote, but I wrote a piece on the new album, the 2013. So I wrote arguably the most fondly remembered tune on the work, Queenie Eye, benefits from Paul Epworth's snare drum fills and ice cold production design. So I think you can see that I like it when he works with other producers. I don't think McCartney could have written something as hip as Queenie Eye without Paul Epworth helping him. But then again, he co-write For You, which is a song I absolutely loathe, with a producer on Egypt Station,
Ryan Tedder.
That should have been binned instantly. That was just a cheap garbage track. It ranks with Spies Like Us as possibly the worst thing McCartney's ever done.
Oh, don't say that. I love Spies Like Us.
I do like it when McCartney experiments with other artists, other producers. I mean, he's done some fantastic work with Kanye West. He's done some fantastic work with Mary Hopkin. But I don't think he needs a producer. I just think he needs a good engineer or a good collaborator or just someone who's willing to tell him, Paul, this song does not work. Bin it. Someone who's brave enough to stand up to him. And I think really the only two producers who were brave enough to do that were George Martin and Nigel Godrich. I think Eric Stewart has admitted he wasn't brave enough to do that. And I'm not sure that Trevor Horn was brave enough to do that. And didn't Trevor Horn produce Rough Ride, which is a terrible track?
Okay. Why do you feel it?
I love it.
I love it too.
Sorry. It's a track that doesn't go anywhere. It's got these bouncy vocals. And who produced Ule La Sole? Ule La Sole is awful.
Oh, but listen to the bass in it, man.
I love that sound of the saw.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe I'm in a minority. I do like it. Like I said earlier in the episode, I would take a Grand Folly from McCartney over a slick retroactive album like Flaming Pie. I would like he's made some grand follies. Like Wildlife is a grand folly. But it's got some great things going for it, and it's trying to be something that Let It Be did not even turn. It's the album McCartney intended for Let It Be to be until Phil Spector got his fingers on it.
You think Flaming Pie was slick?
Yeah, I do think it was quite slick. I mean, it's got Trevor Horn, it's got Elvis Costello. Oh, sorry, Flaming Pie.
Flowers in the Dirt.
That's Flowers in the Dirt. I'm very sorry.
Flowers in the Dirt, you mean?
Sorry. It's half.
Or Off the Ground?
No, I was meant Flaming Pie. I think it's quite slick. It's quite retroactive, and it's returning to the Beatles.
Yeah, it's more retro. It's a more simpler sound and production, definitely.
Yeah, I think it is quite slick. It's got Jeff Lynne. It's got Jim Keltner.
No Jim Keltner on there.
He's on. Is he not on the album?
No.
Not on Flaming Pie, I don't think, is it?
Jim Keltner has never been on a McCartney album.
Has he not?
No.
Okay. Okay. Well, Flaming Pie seems to have. I don't understand Flaming Pie. It seems people see it as sort of like the third wind and the third coming of McCartney. I've never quite understood that praise for the album myself. I think it was him trying to make Beatles Anthology 4, which is not what I want from McCartney. I don't want him looking back. I want him looking into the future.
Okay. We all got different opinions. I like both. You know, for
I mean,
some people, I've talked about Footprints and Only Love Remains as two of the great love songs of his solo career. I would definitely say Some Days is in that category, and Calico Skies is in that category.
Some Days is a fantastic song, and like, what was it? Is it what's it called? Something on a Sunday.
Oh, Heaven on a Sunday.
Heaven on a Sunday.
Heaven on a Sunday.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's great work on there. It's a much more simpler, stripped down production on that album, and a lot of people related to it who want more of the McCartney sound of especially the early 70s. I always use the word organic because people like to use that a lot. But yeah, that's why a lot of people point to Flaming Pie as one of his best.
Maybe. But
can I just go back to the production thing? Sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Now, one of my fears and worries, and maybe Paul's already worked with this producer because it's just come into my head. Who produces Taylor Swift?
I don't know.
I was thinking that as well. That'll be the next one, whoever it is.
I know, it's a worry. It is a worry.
I still think that Paul wouldn't work with these people if he didn't like what they're doing. It isn't just a question of whether or not the albums they work on sell. It's like I said, the when he was at the Grammys and he was enjoying Adele's music, okay, Greg Kurstin produced Adele. He must have enjoyed Adele's music, listening to it. That's probably part of the reason why he chose to work with him. Not just because Adele sold, but because he genuinely loved the music and the sound of it too. So I don't think he just works with anybody. And the producer for Hackney Diamonds, the one that Paul's working with now, also has worked with Justin Bieber. You know, he's worked with a lot of different people. So you're laughing, Owen.
Well,
so you're worried about Taylor Swift. Here's someone who's helped Justin Bieber along. So Paul does pay attention to these things, but at the same time, he works with the people that he wants to work with. So, you know, I just happen to like the fact that he makes all these different choices. You never quite know what he's going to do next. You know, the next album that he makes could be completely different from McCartney 3. New and Egypt Station are completely different albums. You know, Press to Play and Flowers in the Dirt are completely different albums. I wouldn't say that so much about Tug of War and Pipes of Peace. Pipes of Peace is a more uplifting album and it's lighter in sound. But, you know, Paul just does so many different things, and I think it keeps his catalog and his career interesting. For me, anyway. Anyway, so let's wrap things up. And let's talk, first of all, Dino, about your Facebook page and some of the stuff that you like to put up there. It's all about Paul.
Well, I've got 3 Facebook pages. So the main one, where lots of people are on, is Coming Up. That's the world of Paul McCartney, solo, and the Beatles. So anybody can join that if they answer a few simple questions. I've also got a Facebook page called, got to get this right, McCartney 3x3 edition. You can only join that if you've got these albums.
New ones that
if you
just
bought these, you can join it, but you have to answer questions and send photos on Messenger because it's only for members. And the great thing is, so many members have swapped copies, and that's the whole point of it. So you can't join unless you got the album. And I've got another group called it's the McCartney 7-inch singles box set, again, just for owners of it, where they show their test pressings. And I've been collating facts and figures around the world where the test pressings are, where the box numbers are, and I've got a really good list. So yeah, that's the 3 Facebook groups I've got. Always want new members.
Okay, so we'll have to put the links in our description box if you want to subscribe to the 3. Okay. Owen, what do you have going on?
Great.
What do I have going on? So on my channel is mostly you know, Beatles and solo Beatles. I do a little bit of other music as well, but not very much. It's mostly Beatles and solo Beatles. I do news, views, reviews, that sort of thing. I've got a monthly thing that I'm doing at the moment. Beatley Tones Beatles Bargain of the Month, where I go out searching for things that are below market price and sort of tell my viewers about those. So I kind of do the legwork on those. I just try and mix it up a little bit and just do different things. My channel's only like a couple of years old. So I've got a lot of catching up to do. There's still a lot of there's a lot of stuff for me to cover. But
it's there. Endless what there is on the Beatles. But you did a show just recently on what we could expect in 2024, or what you'd like to see come out of Beatles fans.
I did.
What's your actual opinion of what will come out? Not what you necessarily want, what you actually think will come out.
I still think that the archive collection is alive, because what I said in the video, the second leg of the Got Back tour, they changed the tour book, so they included things that weren't in the US leg, things about the Glastonbury gig and the 80 singles crate, and about the McCartney 1, 2, 3 box and all that sort of thing. They added things, and in that original first leg, they had a page on the archive collection, and at the end of that page it said, "Look out for new additions to the archive collection coming soon." Now, when they did the second leg, if they could add those pages, they could have also taken pages away if they weren't relevant anymore, but they left that archive collection page still in the tour book. So and that's what I'm hanging on to. So that is, I'm hoping that the series isn't dead, because it would be such a shame to leave it unfinished. And I think there's 5 possible albums that could be part of this collection. I don't really care which way they go on it, but I think most people want to see London Town and Back to the Egg, and I'm hanging my hat on that will happen this year, because it's a good year for Paul, because there's no anniversaries this year for Paul. He didn't have an album out in no 50th anniversaries anyway. He didn't have an album out in 74, so he should have a bit of time on his hands, really. So we could see a busy year from Paul. We could see a new album towards the end of the year.
It is the 40th anniversary of Give My Regards to Broad Street.
It is, but not 50th. The 40th and 60th don't seem to matter. They don't seem to matter. They don't get the big box set treatment. Only 50th anniversaries seem to. Well, if anniversaries are even important anymore, I don't even know if they are.
Everybody brings them up. That's the reason to put out these box sets, if they could connect it with an anniversary, and it hardly ever works out that way.
Yeah, but look, I mean, it looks like that we're getting the ultimate mixes of John Lennon's Mind Games, and that'll be 51 years, won't it? So
right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm hoping for Living in the Material World box set.
Yeah.
It would be really nice if the Ringo album came out as a box set.
Yeah.
And any album from Paul in an archive box set. But more than anything, I want a new McCartney album. More than anything else.
That's what you want, yeah.
Yeah. What would you want the most, Dino? What's that?
Concerts. Nothing more important than seeing Paul live again. Nothing more important.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Well, being an American, I'm very spoiled.
Yeah, I think that for us,
I know
that'll happen towards the end of the year, because he likes to tour the UK in December, doesn't he? And then he finishes about the 15th, and then he goes to Liverpool for Christmas. So he'll probably do
new album and concerts.
Europe probably in the summer, and then maybe the UK and Ireland in December, maybe.
He's going to keep on touring until he can't do it anymore, as long as he's healthy enough. Owen, what do you have going on?
Just bits and bobs. Talking about Genesis, as Tone brought up earlier, Genesis, I did an interview with original guitar player Steve Hackett, and that will be published. That should be published this Saturday on Penny Black Music. I'm negotiating with another member of Genesis for an interview who I won't name. We'll see how that goes. I'd love to interview that member of Genesis, and I'm writing some film pieces, and I've just written a piece on 10 with the title A Fish Called Wanda, or How John Cleese Learned to Stop Worrying and Become a Romantic Lead. We'll see if a newspaper wants to publish that one, because it's about John Cleese becoming a romantic lead, the one and only time he was a convincing romantic lead in his whole career. It was his pre-racist days, so I think it's okay to read that.
All right, very good. It's hard to escape that image considering how hysterical he is.
Yeah, I had to block him on Twitter in recent years because he was just coming out with such nonsense about Irish and Scottish people.
Okay. Now, we should also repeat that you wrote an article on New, which is in the New Record Collector devoted to Paul. What's the piece you wrote, Dino?
It's a 2-page spread. I don't know if you want to see it. I've got it here, and this is what it is. And I did it's just so amazing. I wrote 2 pages. Sorry, I didn't write about Egypt Station. I'm full of lies. Basically, I was asked questions about my life of collecting Paul, and what I love about his music and my experiences at meeting him, because I've been fortunate enough to meet him many times, and I've got loads of photos. There's a great feature on New by Owen. That's what Owen written. That is absolutely brilliant.
Thank you. That's very kind of you.
See, we're all here to help each other. So basically, I can't find my pages now, but I'm talking about the times I've met Paul, my collection. Sorry?
It's near the back.
I don't even know where I am.
I will say
I've got so many photos. There it is.
That edition of Record Collector featured in my Beatley Tones Beatles bar, by the way.
Yes.
It's
I did see it, Tony, thanks. Yeah. But I've got lots of photos and memories and autographs and things. I keep wanting to do YouTube videos on it all.
Okay.
Well, but the day goes by, then it's a week, then it's a month, I think, to doing it. But I've got so much stories to share, and I want to do them and show photographs and everything. And with Broad Street, I've got a special one this year. I've got so much stuff from Broad Street when I went to the premiere and everything. So yeah, lots in the pipeline still.
Okay. So you'll do that on your YouTube channel, showing all this stuff.
Yes. Yeah. I've got lots of ideas for videos. I've got to get my backside moving and get them up.
Okay. Well, guys, this has been great having this discussion about Tug of War and Paul's solo career and what it is you look forward to in a McCartney album and stuff like that, and what your favorite music is from him. And there will be all kinds of links in the description box if you want to get in touch with Tone or Owen or Dino. Thank you guys for doing this. Thanks to everyone for watching. And we'll be back with another show soon. So take care, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
All right.
All right. Take care.